Colonel Douglas Macgregor joins us. Colonel, always a pleasure. Thank you for your time and your insight. Is the Israeli government running out of time to save itself from the consequences of a massive ground invasion in Gaza?
Well, I think it's certainly headed in that direction. I don't know if it already has. We have to listen to what the Russian ambassador had to say in the United Nations, as well as other leaders in the region. We have to note the recent meeting between the foreign ministers of Turkey and Iran, and then the conversations between the Iranian foreign minister, Mr. Erdogan. All of these things have an ominous tone about them. That doesn't mean that everything is about to fall on Israel immediately, but I think we're headed in that direction, and it doesn't appear that anyone in Washington is interested in halting the rush into disaster.
Was one of Hamas's goals on October 7th to induce an Israeli overreaction so as to coalesce Arab animosity in the region against it?
Well, it's not unreasonable to make that point, but we haven't talked to anyone in Hamas. We don't know what their thinking happens to be, but if that wasn't their intention, it certainly turned out to be that way.
Is the Israeli military walking into a trap by attempting to wage a land war in a place as treacherous, as urban, as filled with tunnels and old buildings as Gaza is?
I think so. I would say on many levels. If we go back to the summer of last year, when the war in Ukraine was changing or evolving, and the world's eyes were fixed almost exclusively on what was happening there. Had the Israelis confronted Hamas at that point, I think the Israelis would have had an easier time waging this sort of ruthless, scorched earth campaign against Hamas than they have right now. It's simply a function of the fact that the world is not looking at Ukraine because the world knows the truth. The war in Ukraine is effectively over. The losses and the destruction in Ukraine are horrendous. Ukrainians can't do much about it. So everyone is focused now on Israel and Hamas, and they're seeing things that upset them. You cannot broadcast the pictures of dead children being carried out of the rubble in Gaza without expecting some sort of horrendous national reaction out of each of the Arab states and from the so-called Arab street. So that's definitely part of it. And on another level, I think that the region is increasingly coalescing into this alliance that might have otherwise never occurred. There's a readiness to take action. There's no doubt about it against the Israelis. And we, again, are the loyal, obedient servants of Mr. Netanyahu and his government.
The loyal, obedient servants of Mr. Netanyahu and his government. I'm sure that that's the way he feels. And of course, that is the way we behave. Back to Erdogan. Are his rantings and ravings before 1 million people, whatever the size of that crowd was, to be taken as for domestic political purposes or in preparation for support for military activity?
Both. There's no question about it. I think both are accurate. Mr. Erdogan is a clever, manipulative politician, if ever there was one. But he's also a very powerful nationalist in the Turkish sense and widely respected inside his country, if for nothing else, his strength in leading Turkey. In fact, you could say that in many ways, he's regarded by many of the Turks in this sense as a strong leader, the way many Israelis regarded Mr. Netanyahu. So I think he's deadly serious. And for the Turks to hold these meetings with the Iranians in public, they've always had meetings privately from time to time, but for these meetings to be so public is a very, very important signal to the world.
Why do you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't take note of this, or if he takes note of it, isn't acting upon it? I mean, my view is that his situation politically at home is so precarious, he only stays in office for as long as the war is being waged. And the minute the war is over, he's out of office and maybe out of freedom. But I would think if Iran and Turkey are cooking something up, and with Erdogan riling up the masses, Netanyahu ought to take note of it and perhaps do something like pull the troops back or let humanitarian aid in. So my question is, if there's a ceasefire, who wins or who's perceived as winning?
I don't know that there will be any winners if there is an immediate ceasefire. In other words, something happens right away. It'll take time to sort out, but I think whatever happens will work to Israel's disadvantage strategically. And I think Mr. Netanyahu, and by the way, I haven't met him. I don't know him. I've read other people's assessments, but I can't evaluate him personally. But I think that he is a ferocious fighter for Israel. There's no question about that. But I also think he's got us in a position where I think he believes this is the time to leverage American national power to try and settle accounts, if he can do it, with his neighbors. And he is focused on that almost to the exclusion of everything else. We are giving him unconditional support on the assumption that he is going to be successful, that he will go in, root out Hamas, destroy the place, and that he can get that done before anything else happens. And we put our forces there as a stopgap measure in the event that Hezbollah attacks. I think it will. I don't know what the timing it will be, but I think they ultimately will do that so that we can distract Hezbollah from interfering with what Mr. Netanyahu is trying to do further south. And I think that's it. I think that's all there is right now. And many Israelis have complained that they don't see any other strategic end state other than Hamas is destroyed and Gaza is in ruins. And that's not, by the way, that's not the kind of strategic end state that you want unless you want another war. That's the problem.
Here's Prime Minister Netanyahu, cut two, Chris, saying that Israel will never agree to a ceasefire.
I want to make clear Israel's position regarding a ceasefire. Just as the United States would not agree to a ceasefire after the bombing of Pearl Harbor or after the terrorist attack of 9/11, Israel will not agree to a cessation of hostilities with Hamas after the horrific attacks of October 7th. Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen.
To me, that is just demagoguery. They could stop fighting for 48 hours and let water and food and fuel and medical supplies in.
Well, I think that's true, but there's something else here. We're hearing these constant references to the Second World War. And yes, we destroyed Germany. Yes, we destroyed Japan. And the result was a 50-year Cold War with the Soviet Union because we had to spend the money and raise the forces to fill the vacuums that we created on the strategic level with the destruction of both Japan and Germany. There were voices in the British General Staff, voices in our own that warned there is a reason why Japan should survive. There are reasons why the Germans need to survive.
Right.
We don't want Hitler. We don't like the militarists in Japan. But these two states have an important role to play in Eurasia, on the periphery of Eurasia. Don't destroy them or we'll end up holding the bag. Well, guess what? That's exactly what happened. Now, Mr. Netanyahu is taking these things and he really wants us to help him do to his enemies in the region what we did to Japan, even if it requires the use of a weapon of mass destruction. I don't think that's in our interest. And I think the longer this lasts and the more that Americans look at this, the more they will question the wisdom of this sort of thing. By the way, Lindsey Graham made essentially the same comments as Mr. Netanyahu. So they're on the same sheet of music.
Well, they sure are. Thank God he's not in the White House, or we would have started World War III by bombing Tehran. Here's Secretary Austin, Austin 3, Chris, on we will provide all the security assistance to Israel and woe to anybody that stands in our way.
We're flowing security assistance into Israel at the speed of war. We're providing air defense capabilities, precision-guided munitions, small-diameter bombs, and other key equipment, including more interceptors for the life-saving Iron Dome system.
Let's run number 5 as well on, you'll like this, General, bold American leadership, Colonel.
In both Israel and Ukraine, democracies are fighting ruthless foes who are out to annihilate them. We will not let Hamas or Putin win. Today's battles against aggression and terrorism will define global security for years to come. And only firm American leadership can ensure that tyrants and thugs and terrorists worldwide are not emboldened to commit more aggression and more atrocities.
This is similar to what he said, and of which you and I and many others were critical when he said, we can project power on two fronts, meaning Israel and Ukraine. Does he know what he's talking about?
Well, as far as the two-front solution that he's discussing, no, he doesn't. He's completely out of touch with reality. He's simply reading from the script that's handed to him by the White House and by Secretary Blinken. This is very disturbing in the sense that we are not simply overreaching. We have gotten onto this one-way street that is ultimately a dead end. We've said Mr. Netanyahu is correct. It's his way or the highway. Either we kill all of the enemies of Israel that pop up over the wall, or we failed. There is no future for us. It reminds me of the German government's statements after the fall of Stalingrad, where they said, this is the year of decision. We're going to destroy all of our enemies and secure victory. We all know that what happened. It was the opposite, and ultimately Germany was doomed at that point. So I think it's very similar. I don't see it leading anywhere good. No, I think Mr. Netanyahu is got us where he wants us, and we're going to ride down the hill with him. And at the bottom is an abyss.
At the risk of getting off onto Ukraine, we're going to play a clip showing you just how absent from reality Secretary Austin is. Cut 4, Chris.
Yet even as we surge support into Israel, we remain focused on Ukraine. Nearly 20 months into Putin's failed campaign of conquest, the Russian military has been badly weakened. Ukraine's brave forces have taken back more than half of the territory seized by Russian invaders since February 2022. And that was made possible by bipartisan and principled U.S. leadership in our coalition of some 50 allies and partners.
Colonel, that's not a political speech. He's under oath to tell the truth. Nothing that he just said, I submit, correct me if you wish, is truthful.
No, it isn't. And I don't know what map he's examining. Perhaps he too is being subjected to the mushroom treatment and being kept in a cave and fed crap. It reminds me of Trotsky, who was approached by one of his Bolshevik colleagues when Trotsky printed things for distribution inside the Soviet Union in 1920 that were utterly false. And he said, comrade, paper will put up with anything you put on it. It seems that both the internet and television will put up with anything that's posted on it. And he could not be more wrong. And again, this is the sort of dangerous fantasy, this sense of limitless resources and capabilities, when the opposite is the case. Our resources and our capabilities are not limitless, and we don't want to squander them unnecessarily. And by the way, the same thing is true for Israel. Both Israel and the United States need to think first and foremost about, number one, their survival and their national power. You don't do anything that puts that at risk. And that's what we're doing. And Mr. Netanyahu is doing that. It's sort of Hitler saying, I'm going to invade the Soviet Union. I'm going to risk everything on one throw of the dice. That's insane. You don't throw dice in strategy.
How dangerous would it be for peace in the region if American troops, Marines or Special Forces, were to be on the ground in Gaza?
Well, the danger is that if they go in any numbers to Israel and they meet the enemy, that obviously they'll take losses. If there are severe losses, if there's more than a few at a time, not only will that awaken the American public from its normal slumber at home, but more important, it would reveal that we are once again not invincible, not invulnerable. And one of the things that, despite all of the stupidity in Ukraine that still exists, is our brand. We still have a pretty good brand despite all the problems. That brand will be destroyed if people think, look, the Americans have come into this and they've lost aircraft, they've lost troops. Gee, they're not that good, they're not that strong. That encourages more enemies to pile on. Again, that's why, unless there's a vital strategic interest at stake, you don't commit forces that could be defeated.
Do your sources inform you about whether there have been American military casualties in Gaza?
Yes, I was told that by a couple of very reliable sources who have to remain anonymous. And they insisted some time ago that we had put people on the ground in Israel. They described them as special ops forces. They could be Army or Marine, obviously. and that they were working with or cooperating closely, and in some cases were there to also observe and learn lessons. Some of them have been involved in the fighting, and I'm told that we've taken casualties. But, we took casualties in Ukraine as well, Judge. We've lost people over there, and we have not been told about it. It has been suppressed and kept secret, and the media has been very helpful to the government in doing this. So I surmise that they're probably right. We've probably taken some losses, but no one is going to advertise it for fear that it would awaken people. Remember, Americans are not really paying that much attention to what happens overseas. I wish they were, but they're not.
I must suggest strenuously that the American public has the right to know when the president of the United States is putting troops on the ground, and some of them are coming back in body bags. Even if they're not coming back in body bags, we have the right to know when he's putting troops on the ground or using the military in any respect.
Yeah, again, this is not December 1944 or January 45. We took tremendous losses in the Battle of the Bulge. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of 140,000 casualties fighting the Germans. The Germans only sustained 68,000, of which only 11,000 were killed. We solved the problem during war by lying. We said the Germans had lost 200,000 and that we had only suffered 70,000. In other words, we reversed the numbers. We didn't tell the truth. Well, we were in the middle of a war, and Americans were very unhappy with how lengthy the war was turning out to be. And a lot of Americans wanted us to bring our forces home. We're not in that situation. We're not in a world war. We don't want to be in a world war. So if we're taking losses and our forces are on the ground, yes, you're right. We need to know so that people can make their voices heard. They can call and say, we don't approve. We don't like it. We don't want it.